The fluorescent lights of the North Line media office hummed with a low, headache-inducing frequency that Ava Martin had come to associate with her entire existence. At 26 years old, Ava felt less like a junior account manager on the rise and more like a woman treading water in the middle of a storm. She stared at the spreadsheet on her monitor, the numbers blurring together into a meaningless soup of red and black. It was 7 in the evening, and the office was mostly empty, save for the cleaning crew and a few other exhausted souls trying to meet end-of-quarter deadlines. She minimized the spreadsheet and opened her banking app, wincing as the balance loaded. After the automatic deduction for her student loans and the check she had just written for rent on her tiny, drafty apartment in the grandiose city, she had exactly $142 to last her the next 2 weeks. Ava rubbed her temples, trying to massage away the tension headache that had taken up permanent residence behind her eyes. It was not just the money. It was never just the money. Her phone buzzed against the mahogany veneer of the desk. The screen lit up with a notification, and her stomach dropped. Eric. The text message was short, but it carried the weight of 6 months of suffocating possessiveness. I drove past your building. Lights are off. You are working late again. You work too much for someone who makes so little. Ava flipped the phone face down, her heart doing a nervous stutter in her chest. It had been 3 months since she had finally gathered the courage to break up with him. 3 months of changing her locks, blocking numbers, and constantly looking over her shoulder. Eric did not understand the word no. He viewed her independence not as a trait to be admired, but as a defect he needed to correct. Ava, come on, you are going to burn a hole in that desk. Ava looked up to see Sarah, the agency's graphic designer, leaning against the doorframe of her cubicle. Sarah was already wearing her coat, a bright crimson trench that looked far too cheerful for a Thursday night. I have to finish this report. Sarah, Ava said, her voice sounding thinner than she would have liked. With the rumors about the acquisition, I cannot afford to look like I am slacking. The rumors had been swirling for a week. Northline Media was a boutique agency, respected but struggling. The word in the break room was that a mysterious investment group was looking to buy them out. Everyone was on edge, terrified of layoffs. Sarah waved a dismissive hand. If they buy us, they buy us. If they fire us, we collect unemployment and go to the beach. But tonight, we are going out. You need a drink? Actually, you need 5 drinks. I really cannot. Ava started. Sarah stepped into the cubicle and spun Ava's chair around. You have looked like a ghost all week. Eric is bothering you again, is he not? Ava looked down at her hands. He texted me. That is it, Sarah declared. We are going to Eclipse. Ava's eyes widened. Eclipse? Sarah, I cannot afford the cover charge at Eclipse, let alone the drinks. That place is for celebrities and hedge fund managers. I know a promoter, Sarah said with a wink. We skipped the line. No cover, 1 drink. Just 1. You need to be somewhere loud enough to drown out your own thoughts. Ava, please. For me? Ava looked at her phone, face down on the desk. The idea of going home to her dark, quiet apartment, wondering if Eric was parked across the street, made her skin crawl. The club would be loud. It would be crowded. It would be safe in its anonymity. 1 drink, Ava said, resigning herself. The transformation from office drone to nightlife participant was hasty. Ava applied a fresh coat of red lipstick and let her dark hair down from its severe bun, shaking it out until it fell in loose waves over the shoulders of her black sheath dress. It was professional enough for work, but form-fitting enough for a night out. The only versatile piece of clothing she owned, Eclipse, was an assault on the senses in the most expensive way possible. The bass thrummed deep in the floorboards, vibrating up through the soles of Ava's heels. The air smelled of expensive cologne, ozone, and chilled vodka. Strobe lights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the sweating, dancing crowd in disjointed bursts of motion. It was overwhelming. And yet, Sarah was right. The noise was so absolute that it wiped Ava's mind clean. She could not worry about her bank account or Eric when she could barely hear herself think. They made their way to the bar, which was a slab of backlit marble glowing a soft, ethereal blue. Sarah ordered 2 martinis, shouting the order over the thumping beat of a house track. Ava took her glass, the condensation cold against her palm, and turned to survey the room. It was a sea of excess. Men in tailored suits that cost more than her car laughed with women draped in silk and diamonds. But Ava's eyes were drawn upward, toward the VIP balcony that overlooked the main floor. It was a sectioned-off area, shrouded in shadow and guarded by men who looked less like bouncers and more like private military contractors. She watched them for a moment. They stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of them, earpieces coiled behind their ears. They were not watching the party. They were scanning it. They looked like predators watching a herd of gazelles. "Who do you think is up there?" Ava shouted to Sarah. Sarah followed her gaze and shrugged. "Some billionaire. Or maybe a rapper. Who cares? Drink." Ava took a sip of the martini. It was strong, the gin biting at her tongue. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the music wash over her. For the first time all day, her shoulders dropped an inch, then a hand clamped around her wrist. The grip was hard, bruising, and painfully familiar. Ava's eyes snapped open, and the breath left her lungs. Eric stood there. He looked out of place in his windbreaker and jeans, his face flushed with a mixture of alcohol and anger. He was shouting something, but the music swallowed his words. He leaned in close, his hot breath hitting her ear. "I knew it," he snarled, his voice cutting through the bass. "You ignore my texts because you are out here acting like a slut." Ava tried to yank her wrist back, but his fingers tightened like a vice. "Eric, let go of me. You should not be here. I went to your apartment," he yelled, ignoring her protest. "You were not there. I tracked your phone." "Ava, you think you can just ghost me and come to a place like this? Who are you trying to impress?" Panic spiked in Ava's chest, cold and sharp. She looked around frantically. Sarah had disappeared into the throng of dancers. The bartender was busy at the other end of the counter. The people around them were too absorbed in their own conversations to notice the domestic dispute unraveling in the middle of the club. "You are hurting me," Ava hissed, her voice trembling. "Leave. Now." "You're coming with me," Eric said, pulling her roughly toward the exit. "We are going to talk about this in the car." "No." Ava dug her heels in, but Eric was stronger. He dragged her a step, then 2. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She needed an out. She needed a shield. Her frantic gaze swept the room and landed on a figure standing near the base of the VIP stairs. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit so sharply tailored it looked like a weapon. He was not dancing. He was not drinking. He was standing perfectly still, his hands in his pockets, watching the crowd with an expression of utter, terrifying boredom. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that seemed carved from granite, hard jaw, straight nose, and eyes that were dark, assessing, and frighteningly intense. He looked dangerous. He looked like the kind of man the world moved out of the way for. He was looking right at her. Ava did not think. Logic abandoned her, replaced by pure survival instinct. She wrenched her arm, catching Eric off guard just enough to stumble back. Before Eric could grab her again, she turned and bolted through the crowd, heading straight for the man in the black suit. Eric was right behind her. She could feel his presence like a looming shadow. She reached the stranger, breathless, her eyes wide with plea. He did not move as she approached, his dark gaze locking onto hers with a mix of curiosity and calculation. "Please," Ava whispered, her voice barely audible over the music as she grabbed the lapels of his suit jacket. "Just go with it." She did not wait for an answer. She stood on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. It was an act of desperation, a shield constructed of flesh and blood. But the moment their lips met, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. She expected him to push her away. She expected him to freeze. Instead, the man reacted with a speed and fluidity that stole her breath. One of his hands came up to the back of her head, tangling in her hair to hold her steady. The other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him with a force that was absolute, yet shockingly protective. The contact was electric. Ava felt the hardness of his chest against her softness, the heat radiating from him through the fine wool of his suit. He smelled of sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and something distinctly masculine, a scent of power and iron. The kiss was not tentative. It was acclaiming. His lips moved against hers with a slow, deliberate pressure that demanded a response. Ava's brain short-circuited. The fear of Eric, the noise of the club, the stress of her job, it all evaporated, replaced by the overwhelming sensory input of this stranger. His heart beat steadily against her chest, a slow, rhythmic thud that felt like an anchor in the chaos. Ava found herself melting into him, her hands sliding up his chest to grip his shoulders. She was trembling, but not from fear anymore. He turned them slowly, putting his broad back to the room, effectively shielding her from anyone approaching. His thumb brushed soothing, rhythmic circles against the small of her back, a silent message that said, "I have you," for a long, suspended moment. They were the only two people in the universe. Then, the man pulled back, just an inch. He did not let her go. His arm remained like a steel band around her waist. His eyes, dark as obsidian, searched her face. He looked at her swollen lips, then up to her wide, dazed eyes. There was curiosity there. Yes, but also a sharp, predatory awareness that sent a shiver down her spine. "Stay close," he murmured. His voice was a deep baritone, rough like velvet dragged over gravel. He looked over her shoulder. Ava turned her head slightly to see Eric standing 3 feet away, looking furious but hesitant. Eric's eyes darted from Ava to the man holding her. The stranger did not say a word. He simply looked at Eric. The look was cold, devoid of emotion, and utterly terrifying. It was a look that promised violence without the need to vocalize it. The man raised 2 fingers in a subtle gesture. Instantly, 2 of the large men Ava had seen guarding the balcony materialized out of the shadows. They did not ask questions. One of them stepped in front of Eric, blocking him from view, while the other took Eric by the elbow. It was not a polite escort. It was a removal. Ava watched as Eric was steered forcefully toward the exit, his protests lost in the music. He did not look back. He looked terrified. Ava let out a breath she did not realize she'd been holding. She turned back to the stranger, realizing with a sudden flush of mortification that she was still clinging to his jacket. She stepped back, her hands dropping to her sides. Her lips still tingled. Her entire body felt like it was humming. "Thank you," she stammered, her voice shaky. "I'm so sorry. I needed him to leave." The man studied her. He did not smile. His gaze traveled over her face, noting the flush on her cheeks, the way her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. "He hurts you?" the man asked. It was not really a question. Ava wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed. "Ex-boyfriend. He does not take hints well. I saw," the man said. He took a step closer and the air between them thickened. Ava felt the urge to run, not out of fear, but out of an overwhelming sense that she was standing next to something far too big, far too dangerous for her to comprehend. This was not a normal man. Normal men did not summon security with a flick of their fingers. Normal men did not kiss like they owned the oxygen in your lungs. "You should go," he said quietly, before he decides to circle back. "My men will make sure you get to a cab." "Thank you," Ava said again. She turned and fled. She did not look for Sarah. She did not look back at the bar. She pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding in her ears, the taste of him still lingering on her tongue like a brand. From the VIP balcony, Luca DeLuca watched her go. He stood with one hand resting on the iron railing, his other hand holding a tumbler of amber liquid that he had no intention of drinking. The club was his. The city, for the most part, was his. He was used to people wanting things from him: money, protection, mercy. He was not used to women throwing themselves at him for protection against pathetic ex-boyfriends. He looked down at his hand, remembering the way her fingers had dug into his lapel, desperate and strong. She had been trembling. A man stepped up beside him. It was Giovanni, his second in command, a man with a scar running through his left eyebrow and a perpetual scowl. Who was the girl? Boss? Giovanni asked, watching the crowd part as Ava disappeared out the front door. I do not know, Luca said softly. She looked out of place. Giovanni noted, too innocent for our world. Luca. She looked like a librarian who took a wrong turn. Luca swirled the liquid in his glass. She kissed me. Giovanni choked on a laugh. She what? And you let her? You usually break the fingers of people who touch you without permission. Luca did not answer. He was replaying the moment in his mind. The scent of vanilla and rain on her skin. The softness of her mouth. The sheer, blind courage it took to grab a man like him and use him as a human shield. She had no idea who he was. That was the most intriguing part. To her, he was just a prop. Find out who she is, Luca ordered, his voice dropping to a tone that meant business. Giovanni sighed. Luca, we have the acquisition meeting tomorrow morning, the merger with Northline. We have the shipment coming in from the docks at noon. We have the issue with the Serrano family. You do not have time to chase a girl from a nightclub. I said find out who she is, Luca repeated, turning his cold gaze on his friend. I want a name and a file on my desk by 8 in the morning. Giovanni held up his hands in surrender. Considered it done. The alarm clock went off at 6 in the morning, sounding like a physical blow to the head. Ava groaned and rolled over, burying her face in the pillow. She had not slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw dark eyes and felt the phantom pressure of a strong hand on the small of her back. She dragged herself out of bed, her body aching not from alcohol. She had never finished that martini, but from the adrenaline crash. She showered, scrubbing her skin until it was pink, trying to wash away the lingering sensation of the night. She dressed in her most professional navy blazer and slacks, pulled her hair back into a tight, severe bun, and drank 2 cups of black coffee before leaving the apartment. She checked the street carefully before stepping out, relieved to see no sign of Eric's car. The subway ride to the Northline media office was a blur. When she arrived, the atmosphere in the office was frantic. People were running back and forth with files. Ties were being straightened, and the break room was out of coffee. Did you hear? Sarah whispered, grabbing Ava's arm the moment she stepped off the elevator. Sarah looked remarkably fresh for someone who had stayed at the club until 2 in the morning. Hear what? Ava asked, dropping her bag at her desk. The buyer. They are here. The entire executive team is in the main conference room. We are all supposed to go in for the introduction in 10 minutes. Ava felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. This was it. The moment they found out if they still had jobs. She grabbed a notebook and followed the herd of anxious employees into the large glass-walled conference room at the center of the floor. The room was packed. Ava squeezed into a spot near the back, standing against the wall. The CEO of Northline, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, stood at the head of the table. He was sweating. Good morning, everyone, Mr. Henderson said, his voice trembling slightly. Thank you for gathering on such short notice. As you know, there have been discussions regarding the future of Northline Media. I am pleased to announce that the acquisition has been finalized. We are now under the umbrella of DeLuca Holdings. A murmur went through the room. DeLuca Holdings was a massive conglomerate. They owned real estate, shipping logistics, construction firms, and high-end hospitality venues. A marketing agency seemed like a strange addition to their portfolio. I would like to introduce you to the CEO of DeLuca Holdings and your new owner. Mr. Henderson continued, gesturing to the double doors at the side of the room. Mr. Luca DeLuca. The doors opened. The room went silent. A man walked in, flanked by 2 assistants. He wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Ava's entire student loan debt. He moved with a predatory grace, commanding the attention of every person in the room without saying a word. Ava stopped breathing. The notebook slipped from her numb fingers and hit the carpet with a soft thud. It was him. It was the stranger from the club. He walked to the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He looked different in the harsh fluorescent light of the office, colder, sharper, more distant, but the eyes were the same. Those dark, heavy eyes that had looked at her with such intense desire only 12 hours ago. Thank you. Mr. Henderson, Luca said. His voice was the same deep baritone that had whispered, "Stay close," in her ear. He scanned the room, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his new employees. He looked bored, efficient, and lethal. And then, his gaze stopped, across the crowded room, over the heads of 30 people. His eyes locked onto Ava. For a second, time suspended. Ava felt her heart slam against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack the bone. She wanted to shrink into the wall. She wanted to disappear. She had kissed her new boss. She had made out with the man who now owned her career. A faint, barely perceptible smirk curved the corner of Luca's mouth. It was gone in an instant, but Ava saw it. He knew. He absolutely knew. "I look forward to working with all of you," Luca said, holding her gaze for 1 second too long before turning back to the room. "We have a lot of work to do." Ava closed her eyes and wished, fervently, that the floor would open up and swallow her whole. Her life had just become infinitely more complicated. The air in the conference room remained sucked out of the space long after Luca De Luca finished his opening remarks. The acquisition meeting had dissolved into a frantic shuffle of papers and whispered anxieties among the Northline media staff, but Ava Martin felt frozen in her chair. Every time she dared to lift her eyes, she found Luca watching her. It was not the blatant stare of a man checking out a woman at a bar. It was far more unnerving. It was the calculated, assessing gaze of a predator deciding which weak gazelle to isolate from the herd. He stood near the head of the table, speaking in low tones to the trembling CEO, Mr. Henderson, but his body was angled slightly toward Ava, once, when their eyes met across the mahogany expanse. The corner of his mouth ticked up in that same faint, arrogant smirk she had seen earlier. It made heat climb up her neck, a mixture of humiliation and a strange, spiking anger. She felt exposed, stripped of her professional armor, to everyone else. He was the terrifying new owner of their company, to her. He was the man whose lapels she had grabbed in a panic, the man whose mouth had moved against hers with devastating expertise in the shadows of a nightclub only hours ago. She busied herself with stacking her files, her hands shaking slightly. She needed to get out of this room. She needed to hide in her cubicle and hyperventilate in peace. "Miss Martin." The voice was like dark velvet wrapped around steel. Ava froze. The entire room seemed to quiet down, heads turning to look at the junior account manager standing near the back wall. She looked up. Luca was looking directly at her. "I understand you handled the lifestyle and boutique accounts," Luca said. His expression was perfectly neutral, but his eyes danced with a private amusement that made Ava want to throw her stapler at him. "Join us in the boardroom in 10 minutes. We're doing a deep dive into the underperforming assets." He did not wait for an answer. He turned and strode out of the room, his entourage of suits trailing behind him like a dark wake. Ava swallowed hard, ignoring the bewildered looks from her colleagues. Sarah leaned over, eyes wide. "Why does the new billionaire overlord know your name? And why is he looking at you like he is trying to figure out a puzzle?" "I have no idea," Ava lied, her voice tight. 10 minutes later, Ava walked into the smaller, glass-walled boardroom. It was an intimate setting, which was the last thing she wanted. Mr. Henderson was there, looking pale, along with the VP of sales and 2 of Luca's stone-faced advisors. Luca sat at the head of the table, his jacket unbuttoned, looking entirely too comfortable in a room thick with tension. "Sit," Luca commanded, gesturing to the empty chair directly to his right. Ava hesitated, then walked over, her heels clicking loudly on the floor. She sat, keeping her spine rigid, refusing to look at him. Luca wasted no time. He opened a sleek black folder. "I have reviewed the quarterly earnings. They are unimpressive. The agency is bleeding money on legacy clients who have not increased their spend in 5 years. He began to dissect the company's failures with surgical precision. He was brutal, cutting off the VP of sales mid-sentence when the man tried to offer excuses. Luca did not care about effort. He cared about results. Ava watched him, despite herself. He was terrifyingly intelligent. He understood the numbers better than the people who had been working here for a decade, and then, without looking up from the file, he He spoke. "Miss Martin, explain the drop in the Delacroix account?" Ava blinked, startled. The Delacroix account was one of hers, a high-end jewelry brand that had been difficult to manage. She felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room, but none felt heavier than Luca's. He turned his head slowly, waiting. Ava stammered, her mind going blank. The sudden spotlight made her throat close up. "I believe it is a market trend issue." Luca raised an eyebrow. "You believe? Or you know? If you are guessing, I can find someone else who deals in facts." The sharp rebuke stung, but it also snapped her out of her panic. She took a breath, channeling the frustration she felt toward him into her voice. "It is not a guess," Ava said, her voice steadying. "Delacroix refuses to pivot to digital marketing. They are pouring 80% of their budget into print ads in magazines that their target demographic does not read. I have proposed a social media strategy 3 times this quarter, but their internal marketing director is resistant to change. The drop is not due to a lack of effort on our part. It is due to client stubbornness." Silence stretched across the table. "Mr. Henderson looked like he might faint. One did not speak back to Luca DeLuca. Luca stared at her. For a long moment, his face was unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Show me the proposal," he said. Ava slid her folder across the table. Luca opened it, scanning the pages. His eyes moved effectively, absorbing the information. "This is good work," he murmured, almost to himself. He looked up at her, and the coldness in his eyes thawed into something resembling respect. "You are right. They are wasting money. We will drop them if they do not agree to the pivot by Monday." The meeting continued for another hour, but the dynamic had shifted. Luca continued to challenge her, asking sharp, probing questions about her other clients, but the mockery was gone. He was testing her, pushing against her intellect to see if it held firm, and to Ava's surprise, she pushed back. When the meeting adjourned, the other executives filed out quickly, eager to escape the predator's den. Ava gathered her things, her hands trembling from the adrenaline dump. She stood to leave. "Ava, stay." It was not a request. It was an order, delivered in a low, rumbling tone that vibrated in her chest. Ava paused, clutching her files to her chest like a shield. "Mister." Henderson closed the glass door behind him, leaving them alone in the soundproof fishbowl. Luca stood up and walked around the table. He did not stop until he was standing in front of her, leaning back against the edge of the table, crossing his ankles. The casual posture did nothing to diminish the sheer size of him. He filled the space. "Is this about the accounts?" Ava asked, striving for a professional tone despite the way her pulse was hammering in her throat. "Because if it is, I can email you the—" "You have a sharp mind," Luca interrupted, his voice dry. "It is a waste to see it being used to sell overpriced jewelry to people who do not need it." "Thank you," Ava said stiffly. "Is that all, Mr. DeLuca?" Luca tilted his head, studying her face. "Mr. DeLuca," very formal. "That is a significant change from last night, when you had your tongue down my throat in the middle of eclipse." Ava's face flamed so hot she felt dizzy. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "I did not have my tongue down your throat," she hissed, her voice dropping to a mortified whisper. "And I would appreciate it if we could keep my personal life separate from my professional one." Luca pushed off the table and took a step toward her. Ava held her ground, refusing to back away, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "You made your personal life my business when you used me as a human shield," he said softly. "Do you make a habit of grabbing strangers and kissing them? Is that your standard greeting?" "No," Ava snapped. "It was an emergency. I told you that." "An emergency," Luca repeated, testing the word. He stepped closer again. He was close enough now that she could smell that same intoxicating scent of sandalwood and danger. He looked down at her, his dark eyes burning with a curiosity that felt invasive. "You were terrified. I felt your heart beating against my chest. You were shaking. I was startled." Ava lied. "You were hunting for an exit," Luca corrected. "And the man? The one my security removed. Who is he?" Ava bristled. "That is none of your business. It is my business if my employees are being harassed in my nightclubs," Luca said, his voice dropping an octave. becoming serious. Why were you scared of him? Ava. He's just an ex, Ava said, looking away, unable to hold his intense gaze. He is difficult. He does not understand boundaries. It is fine. I handled it. You did not handle it, Luca said bluntly. You hid. There is a difference. He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm as if he wanted to touch her, to check for invisible injuries. Ava flinched instinctively. Luca's hand froze in midair. His eyes narrowed, a flash of cold fury passing through them that she realized, with a jolt, was not directed at her. Did he hurt you? Luca asked. The question was quiet, deadly. No, Ava said quickly. She took a step back, needing distance. The intensity radiating off him was overwhelming. Look, I appreciate you helping me last night. Really, but we are in an office now. You're my boss. We cannot talk about this. Luca lowered his hand slowly. His jaw was tight. For a moment, she thought he would push, demand an answer. He looked like a man who was used to getting every answer he wanted. Fine, he said. His voice clipped. Go back to your desk. But Ava... She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. If there is another emergency, he said, his dark eyes locking onto hers, you come to me. Do not grab another stranger. You might not get lucky next time. Ava did not answer. She fled the room. She walked quickly down the hallway, needing fresh air. As she passed the slightly ajar door of Luca's temporary executive suite a few minutes later, having forgotten her phone charger in the conference room and doubling back, she heard his voice. He was speaking in Italian at first, fast and aggressive, then switched to English. I do not care what the excuse is, Luca snarled. The shipment sits at the docks until I say it moves. If Serrano thinks he can encroach on the downtown territory just because I am busy with an acquisition, he is mistaken. Ava slowed her steps, her blood turning to ice. Send a message, Luca continued, his voice devoid of humanity. Deal with the leak. I want it clean, but I want them to know it was me. No loose ends? Ava stopped breathing. Territory. Shipments. Deal with the leak. This was not corporate talk. This was not about marketing strategies or jewelry accounts. The rumors about the investment group had been vague, but this sounded like a script from a movie she would be too scared to watch. She hurried past the door, her heels silent on the carpet, her mind reeling. She had kissed a monster. She was working for a monster. The rest of the day was a blur of anxiety. Ava left the office precisely at 5, keeping her head down, terrified that Luca would call her back in and she would see the violence in his eyes that she had heard in his voice. The city was gray and drizzling as she took the bus home. Her apartment building was an old, crumbling brick structure in a neighborhood that was slowly being gentrified, but still held on to its grit. She walked the 2 blocks from the bus stop, clutching her purse, looking over her shoulder. She told herself she was being paranoid. She was wrong. As she reached the stoop of her building, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the alleyway. Eric. Ava stopped, her heart plummeting. He looked worse than he had the night before. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair disheveled. He reeked of cheap beer and desperation. You got me thrown out. He spat. His voice slurred. Eric, go home, Ava said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her knees were shaking. I am calling the police. You embarrassed me, Eric shouted, stepping toward her. Who was he, huh? That guy in the suit? Is that who you are sleeping with? Is that why you think you are too good for me now? He is nobody, Ava said, backing up toward the street. Leave me alone. He grabbed her. It happened fast, his hand clamped around her upper arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh painfully. Ava cried out, trying to twist away, but he yanked her closer. His face twisted in ugly rage. You listen to me, he hissed. You do not get to walk away from me. I made you. You are nothing without me. Let go, Ava screamed, swinging her free hand at him. Tires screeched. A massive black SUV mounted the curb, hopping the sidewalk and coming to a halt 3 feet from where they struggled. The doors flew open before the vehicle had even fully stopped. 2 massive men in suits, the same security from the club, stepped out, their movements synchronized and menacing. But but it was the man who emerged from the back seat who sucked the air out of the street. Luca De Luca stepped onto the pavement. He was not wearing his suit jacket anymore. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked like they could crush stone. He did not shout. He did not run. He walked toward them with a terrifying, silent purpose. "Let her go," Luca said. The voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the hair on Ava's arms stand up. It was the voice of a man who commanded armies. Eric froze, his grip loosening slightly in shock. Who are you?" I said. "Let her go," Luca repeated. He stopped 5 feet away. His bodyguards flanked him, hands hovering near their jackets, suggesting weapons. Eric looked from the massive guards to Luca, and the color drained from his face. He released Ava and took a stumbling step back. "I was just talking to her," Eric stammered, holding up his hands. "We are together. We are not." Ava gasped, rubbing her arm where his fingers had left throbbing marks. Luca's eyes flicked to Ava, scanning her quickly for injury, before returning to Eric. The look he gave Eric was pure, unadulterated violence contained within a human skin. "If you touch her again," Luca said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than a scream. "If you even look in her direction, I will dismantle your life. I will strip away everything you have, and then I will come for you. Do you understand?" Eric swallowed audibly. He looked like he was about to be sick. "Get out of here," Luca snapped. Eric did not need to be told twice. He turned and ran, disappearing down the street into the gathering darkness. The silence that followed was heavy. The bodyguards stepped back, giving them space, standing watch by the SUV. Ava stood on the sidewalk, trembling violently. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her weak. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces of her composure together. Luca turned to her. The cold menace fell away from his face, replaced by an expression of concern that confused her. He stepped close, crowding her personal space. But this time, she did not flinch. "Did he hurt you?" Luca asked. Ava shook her head, unable to speak. Luca reached out and gently took her wrist, the one Eric had grabbed the night before, the one she was currently rubbing. His fingers were warm and rough. He pushed her sleeve up slightly, inspecting the skin. It was red, already starting to bruise. His jaw tightened until a muscle feathered in his cheek. He ran his thumb over the red mark, a touch so feather-light it made her breath hitch. It was a possessive touch, staking a claim, but it was also incredibly tender. "I should have broken his hands," Luca murmured, his eyes focused on her wrist. "I do not need you to fight my battles," Ava whispered, though the words lacked conviction. Her heart was racing, not from fear of Eric anymore, but from the proximity of this dangerous, confusing man. "You need protection," Luca said, looking up. His dark eyes locked onto hers. "Why do you fight it?" "Because I do not want to be owned," Ava said, her voice trembling. Luca stared at her. The streetlights cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones. He looked at her mouth. Ava's breath caught. The memory of the kiss at the club rushed back, the heat, the taste, the safety. He leaned in. Ava did not pull away. She stood frozen, her lips parting slightly, her body swaying toward him like a flower toward the sun. She wanted him to kiss her. God help her. She wanted to feel that power wrapped around her again. Luca's head lowered, his breath, warm and smelling of mint, brushed against her lips. He was inches away. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. Then he stopped. A shudder went through him, a visible act of restraint. He closed his eyes for a second, inhaling sharply through his nose, and then pulled back. He dropped her wrist. "Go inside." "Ava," he said, his voice rough, strained. "Lock your door." But Ava started. "Go," Luca commanded, turning away from her toward the SUV. "Before I do something we will both regret." He did not look back. He got into the car, the door slamming shut with a definitive thud. The SUV pulled away, disappearing into the night, leaving Ava standing alone on the sidewalk under the flickering streetlight. She turned and ran up the stairs to her apartment. Her hands shook so badly she dropped her keys twice before managing to unlock the door. She slammed it shut and threw the deadbolt, sliding the chain into place. She leaned her back against the door, sliding down until she hit the floor. Her apartment was quiet, but her mind was screaming. She touched her lips. They still tingled from the ghost of his breath. She looked at her wrist, where his thumb had brushed away the pain. Eric wanted to control her. He used fear and guilt. Luca was different. Luca was dangerous in a way Eric could never dream of being. He spoke of shipments and territories. He had men who looked like killers at his beck and call. And yet, when he looked at her, she did not feel small. She felt seen. She was standing on a precipice. On one side was the safe, miserable life she had been living. On the other was a free fall into darkness with a man who might catch her or crush her. She closed her eyes, fear and desire tangling together in her chest like vines. She had traded one dangerous man for another. She realized the only difference was that this time, she was not sure she wanted to run away. The reorganization of the Northline Media executive floor happened with the swift, brutal efficiency that Ava Martin was beginning to associate with everything Luca DeLuca touched. 1 week after the acquisition was finalized, a memo went out to the entire company announcing a restructuring of the client management protocols. Buried in the corporate jargon was a single line that changed Ava's life. Miss Ava Martin has been appointed as the interim executive liaison to the CEO. By noon that same day, maintenance workers had moved her belongings from her cramped cubicle to a sleek, modern desk situated directly outside the double glass doors of Luca's office. She was no longer just a junior account manager. She was the gatekeeper to the most powerful man in the city. The promotion came with a raise that made Ava's breath catch, enough to clear her credit card debt in 3 months. But it also came with a heavy social tax. The break room fell silent whenever she walked in to refill her coffee. The whispers were not subtle. They floated over the cubicle walls, words like sleeping with the boss and fast track and unqualified. Ava tried to keep her head high, focusing on her screen, but the sting of judgment burned. She wanted to turn around and scream that she was working harder than she ever had in her life, that Luca demanded perfection, and that her new role consisted mostly of translating his terrifyingly concise orders into language the rest of the staff could understand without having a nervous breakdown. "Ava!" The deep voice came through the intercom on her desk, making her jump. "Yes, Mr. DeLuca?" she answered, pressing the button. "Come in." Ava smoothed her skirt, took a deep breath to steel herself, and opened the glass door. Luca was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the gray skyline. He did not turn when she entered. The office was vast, decorated in stark blacks and grays, a reflection of the man who inhabited it. "You called?" Ava asked, stopping in front of his massive desk. Luca turned. He looked tired. There were shadows beneath his eyes that had not been there a week ago, and the tension in his jaw suggested he was grinding his teeth. "I need the portfolio summaries for the charity gala on Friday," he said, walking over to his chair and sinking into it. "And I need you to review the guest list. There are people coming who require special handling." Ava nodded, pulling up the file on her tablet. "I have the list here. Senator Miller, the frantic real estate developers, and the board of the hospital, and the families," Luca added quietly. Ava paused. She knew what he meant. The other families. The people who operated in the shadows. Just like him. Since the incident with Eric and the overheard phone call, Ava had stopped pretending Luca was just a businessman. She knew he was something else. Something dangerous. Though they never spoke of it directly. "I will make sure the seating chart keeps the incompatible parties separate," Ava said diplomatically. Luca looked at her then, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "You are good at this, Ava. You navigate the minefield better than people I have paid triple your salary." "I grew up navigating minefields," Ava said before she could stop herself. Luca's eyes narrowed slightly, focused on her face. "What does that mean?" Ava looked down at her tablet, regretting the slip. "Nothing. Just family drama. Everyone has it. Not everyone has it like us." Luca murmured. The air in the room shifted, the professional distance collapsing into that familiar, terrifying intimacy. Ava felt the pull of him, a magnetic force that seemed to drag her center of gravity toward his side of the desk. "Is that all, Mr. DeLuca?" she asked, her voice sounding breathless to her own ears. Luca held her gaze for a long moment. "Yes, that is all." 2 nights later. The city was battered by a fierce autumn storm. Rain lashed against the glass walls of the office, and thunder rattled the window panes. It was 9 o'clock at night. The rest of the staff had gone home hours ago, but Ava was still at her desk, finalizing the strategy for the new tech client Luca had insisted they pitch. Inside the office, Luca was still working as well. The door was open and she could hear the scratch of his pen on paper and the occasional rustle of documents. It was a companionable silence, a small bubble of light in the dark, empty building. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered violently. A loud pop echoed from the mechanical room down the hall, and the entire floor plunged into semi-darkness. The only illumination came from the glowing blue light of Ava's computer monitor and the city lights bleeding in through the rain-streaked windows. Ava gasped, freezing in her chair. "Stay put." Luca's voice came from the darkness of his office, calm and commanding. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway. He had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, his tie loosened at the collar. In the eerie blue glow of the monitor, he looked less like a CEO and more like a warrior at rest. "It is just a grid fluctuation," Luca said, walking over to her desk. "The backup generators will kick in for the servers, but the lights might be out for a while." He came around the side of her desk to look at her screen. He did not stand back. He leaned over her shoulder, bracing one hand on the edge of the desk and the other on the back of her chair. Suddenly, he was everywhere. Ava was enveloped in his heat. She could smell the crisp scent of his starch, the underlying notes of sandalwood and rain, and the warm, masculine scent of his skin. He was so close that if she turned her head an inch, her nose would brush his neck. "You were working on the pitch?" Luca asked, his voice a low rumble near her ear. Ava swallowed hard, her fingers freezing on the keyboard. "Yeah, the demographics. I think we should target the urban market first." Luca leaned in closer to read the text on the screen. The movement brought his chest against her shoulder. Ava stopped breathing. The darkness of the room made the contact feel illicit, heightened. Every nerve ending in her body was screaming, hyper-aware of his presence. "You are right," Luca murmured, his eyes on the screen, but his attention clearly divided. "The urban market is faster, more aggressive." He shifted his weight, and his knee brushed against hers. It was a simple contact, bone against bone through layers of fabric, but it sent a jolt of electricity through Ava that was so sharp she actually jumped. Luca went still. He did not pull away. His knee remained pressed against hers, a point of heat that anchored her to the floor. His hand on the back of her chair tightened. Ava turned her head slowly, unable to help herself. Luca was looking down at her. His face was inches away, illuminated by the ghostly blue light. His eyes were dark, dilated, searching hers with a raw hunger that terrified and thrilled her. "Ava," he whispered. The way he said her name, like it was a prayer or a curse, made her heart hammer against her ribs. She felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by the gravity of his presence. Then the overhead lights buzzed and slammed back on, flooding the space with harsh, clinical brightness. Luca pulled back instantly. The mask of the CEO slammed back into place. Though his chest was rising and falling a little too fast, he cleared his throat and straightened his tie. "Good," he said, his voice rough. "The power is back. Finish the proposal. Ava, then go home. It is late." He turned and walked back into his office, closing the door firmly behind him. Ava sat alone in the humming silence, her hand trembling as she reached for her water bottle. The DeLuca Foundation Charity Gala was the event of the season. It was held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, a venue dripping with crystal chandeliers and gold leaf. When Luca had first insisted she attend, Ava had tried to refuse. "I am just the liaison." "Luca," she had argued in his office, "I do not belong at a gala." I cannot afford a dress that fits in with that crowd. You are my representative, Luca had countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. And do not worry about the dress. It is handled. He had been right. A box had arrived at her apartment the next day containing a dress that was simple, elegant, and undoubtedly cost more than her car. It was a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that skimmed her body like water, with a tasteful neckline and a back that dipped low. Now, standing at the entrance to the ballroom, Ava felt like an imposter. The room was filled with the city's elite, politicians, celebrities, and business tycoons. Ava. She turned to see Luca approaching through the crowd. He stopped 3 feet away, and for a second, he just looked at her. His gaze traveled from the hem of her dress up to her face, his eyes darkening appreciatively. He looked devastating in a tuxedo, the stark black and white emphasizing his dark coloring. "You look extraordinary," he said softly. "Thank you," Ava managed to say, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. "You clean up well yourself." Luca offered his arm. "Shall we?" As she slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, he pulled her slightly closer than was necessary. His hand covered hers, his grip firm. As they walked the red carpet toward the photographers, his hand shifted to her waist, splaying possessively against the silk of her dress. "Smile." He whispered against her hair as the cameras flashed. "Let them see that you belong here." "I do not belong here," Ava whispered back, smiling tightly for the cameras. "You are with me," Luca said, his voice hard with conviction. "That means you belong." They moved through the room, Luca introducing her to senators and CEOs. He never left her side. He was a shield between her and the curious, judging eyes of the high society crowd. When the music shifted to a slow, melodic waltz, Luca turned to her. "Dance with me." "I do not dance," Ava protested. "I do not ask," Luca replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He led her to the dance floor, under the soft golden lights. He pulled her into his arms. One of his hands pressed firmly against the small of her back, guiding her movements with effortless strength. Ava's hand rested on his shoulder, her fingers curling into the expensive fabric of his jacket. They moved together in silence for a moment, the world narrowing down to the space between their bodies. They fit together perfectly, her softness yielding to his hardness. "You seem tense," Luca noted quietly. "I am waiting for someone to realize I am just a girl from the bad side of town wearing a borrowed dress," Ava admitted. Looking up at him, Luca's expression softened. "The bad side of town is where the survivors come from, Ava. I grew up 3 blocks from where you live." Ava blinked. "You did? But your family—" "My father made his money in blood before he made it in real estate," Luca said bluntly. "We never had stability until I was 10. I know what it is like to sleep with one eye open." Ava felt a sudden, sharp pang of empathy. "I spent my whole childhood waiting for the other shoe to drop," she confessed. "My dad left when I was 5. My mom, she tried, but we moved every 6 months. I never felt safe. I never felt like I could put down roots." Luca's hand on her back tightened. "Is that why you stayed with Eric? Because he felt like a root? Even if it was a rotten one?" "Maybe," Ava whispered. "I just wanted someone who would not leave. I do not let people close enough to leave," Luca said, his voice dropping to a low, rough timbre. "In my world, love is leverage. Ava, it is a weakness my enemies can use to slit my throat. That is why I am alone. That is why it has to be this way." The confession hung between them, heavy and tragic. He was telling her why he kept his heart cold, but the way he was holding her, like she was something precious he was terrified to break, told a different story. The song ended, but they did not pull apart immediately, for a heartbeat. They just stood there, swaying slightly, lost in each other. "We should go," Luca said abruptly, his voice strained. "Before I forget where we are." The exit from the hotel was a flurry of activity. Luca's security team flanked them as they moved toward the waiting line of black SUVs. The air outside was crisp and cold. Luca guided Ava into the back seat of the armored vehicle. He slid in beside her, and the heavy door thudded shut, sealing them in quiet luxury to the penthouse. Luca ordered the driver. The car pulled out into traffic. Ava leaned back, exhausted but buzzing with the lingering emotion of the dance. She looked at Luca. He was staring out the window, his profile sharp and unreadable. "Luca, she began. A screech of tires cut her off. A dark van swerved violently from the side street, slamming into the front of their SUV. The impact threw Ava forward, the seatbelt locking painfully against her chest. "Get down!" Luca roared. Before Ava could process what was happening, Luca was moving. He unbuckled his seatbelt and threw his body over hers, pressing her down into the leather seat. Gunfire erupted. Pop, 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 pop. The sound was deafening. The bulletproof glass of the window spider-webbed inches from Luca's head, absorbing the impact but shattering the outer layer. "Drive!" Luca shouted at the driver. "Get us out of here!" The driver slammed the car into reverse, tires smoking as he spun the heavy vehicle around. The SUV bucked as it hopped the curb, scraping against a lamppost. More shots rang out, pinging off the metal chassis like hail. Ava was pressed into the seat, her face buried in Luca's chest. She could feel his heart hammering against her cheek, not a slow rhythm anymore, but a frantic, powerful beat. His arm was clamped over her head, shielding her completely. He was a human wall. He was taking the line of fire for her. The SUV accelerated, weaving through traffic, leaving the attackers behind. The driver was shouting into a radio, calling for backup. "Are we clear?" Luca barked, not moving an inch. "Clear, boss, we lost them. 2 minutes to the secure location." Luca slowly lifted his weight off her. Ava sat up, gasping for air, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Are you hurt?" Luca demanded, grabbing her face in his hands. He scanned her frantically, his eyes wild. "Did they hit you?" "Ava, talk to me." I am okay," Ava stammered. "I am fine." I am fine," Luca said. Then Ava saw the blood. A dark stain was spreading rapidly on the white sleeve of his shirt, just above the elbow. "You are bleeding," she cried, reaching for his arm. "It is nothing," Luca said through gritted teeth. "Just glass, or a graze." The penthouse was a fortress in the sky. Security teams swarmed the lobby as Luca and Ava were ushered into the private elevator. Luca refused a stretcher, walking under his own power, though his face was pale. Inside the apartment, Luca's personal doctor was waiting. He quickly assessed the wound, a deep gash from a ricocheted bullet fragment, not a direct hit. He cleaned it and stitched it up while Luca sat on the leather sofa, drinking a glass of whiskey without flinching. Ava stood in the corner, hugging her arms, watching him. She was still in her gala dress, but it felt like a costume now. Once the doctor left, silence descended on the room. Ava walked over to the sofa. Luca was staring at the floor, his injured arm resting on his thigh, the white bandage stark against his black trousers. "Let me check it," Ava said softly. She knelt on the floor between his legs. Luca looked up, his eyes heavy. "You should not be doing this," he said raspily. "You should be running away from me." "Ava." Tonight proved that. Ava ignored him. She reached out and gently checked the tape on the bandage. Her hands were still shaking, tremors of adrenaline aftershocks running through her. "You saved my life," she whispered. "You covered me. You could have been killed." "I would rather take a bullet than watch you take one," Luca said. The words came out simple, factual, and devastating. Ava froze. She looked up into his eyes. The barrier was down. The adrenaline had stripped away all the pretenses, all the professional walls. There was only the raw, bleeding truth between them. She saw the fear in his eyes, not fear for himself, but fear for her. And beneath the fear, a hunger, so vast it terrified her. "Luca," she breathed. She placed her hand on his uninjured arm, sliding it up to his neck. His skin was burning hot. Luca made a sound low in his throat. He caught her wrist with his good hand. His grip was hard, desperate. He pulled her slightly closer. Ava leaned in. The distance between them evaporated. She could feel his breath on her lips, taste the whiskey and the danger. She wanted him to close the gap. She wanted to forget the gunfire and the fear and just feel him. Their lips were millimeters apart. Her eyes fluttered shut. No. The word was a rough exhale. Luca jerked back as if he had been burned. He released her wrist and stood up, putting distance between them. He walked to the window, turning his back to her, his shoulders heaving. "I cannot do this," he said, his voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "Luca?" Ava asked, hurt flashing through her. "I cannot drag you into this." "Ava," he shouted, spinning around, "did you not see what happened tonight? That is my life. That is my reality. Bullets, blood, enemies who do not care who they hurt to get to me." "I do not care," Ava said, standing up. "You should care," Luca roared. He raked his hand through his hair. "I want you. God. Ava, I want you so much I can barely think straight, but I cannot be selfish. Not with you. I cannot make you a target." He looked at her with a mixture of longing and despair that broke her heart. "Go to the guest room," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Lock the door. My men will take you home in the morning. But please, Ava," Luca begged, his eyes closing. "Just go, before I stop trying to be a good man and take what I want." Ava looked at him for one last agonizing second. Then, swallowing her tears, she turned and walked down the hall, leaving him alone in the center of his golden cage. The morning sun that filtered through the curtains of the guest room in Luca's penthouse felt mocking in its brightness. Ava sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the news report playing on the wall-mounted television. The volume was low, but the headlines screamed, "Organized crime tensions escalate in downtown shootout. Police suspect turf war." There was no mention of a charity gala. No mention of a marketing executive cowering in the back seat of a luxury SUV while bullets shattered the glass. To the world, it was just another violent statistic in a loud city. To Ava, it was a wake-up call that rang louder than any alarm she had ever set. She dressed in the clothes she had worn the night before, the elegant blue silk gown now wrinkled and feeling ridiculous in the morning light. One of Luca's housekeepers had silently left a change of clothes, a simple tracksuit, outside the door, but Ava ignored it. She needed to leave. She needed to get back to her apartment, change into her armor of business casual, and end this. The ride to the office was silent. Luca's driver took her to her apartment first, waiting while she frantically changed into a gray pencil skirt and blouse, then drove her to Northline Media. When she walked onto the executive floor, the silence was heavy. People looked at her, then looked away. They knew something had happened, even if they did not know the details. Ava did not go to her desk. She walked straight to the double glass doors of Luca's office and pushed them open without knocking. Luca was there, standing behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear. He looked like he had not slept. His shirt was fresh, but his eyes were hard, red-rimmed and dangerous. He saw her enter and held up a hand, signaling for her to wait. Ava did not wait. "I am quitting," she announced, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. Luca froze. He said something short and sharp into the phone and hung up, tossing the device onto the mahogany surface of his desk with a clatter. "Ava," he started, his voice low and warning. "No," Ava interrupted, marching further into the room. "I am done. Luca, I saw the news. I saw the bullet holes in the window. I am not a soldier. I am an account manager. I did not sign up to be collateral damage in a mob war just because I am useful to you." She reached into her bag and pulled out her ID badge, slamming it onto the desk. "I am not your pawn," she said, her voice rising. "You dressed me up, paraded me around to make yourself look legitimate, and nearly got me killed. I am leaving." Luca moved. He came around the desk with a speed that made her flinch, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. He did not grab her. He did not touch her, but he invaded her space so completely that the air left her lungs. "You are not leaving," he said. The calm in his voice was terrifying because it was so clearly forced. "You cannot keep me here," Ava shouted, stepping back. She backed up until her shoulder blades hit the glass wall of the office. There was nowhere else to go. Luca followed her. He slammed his hand against the glass right next to her head. The sound reverberated through the pane, a sharp crack that made the entire room jump. Ava refused to flinch. She lifted her chin, locking her eyes with his. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but she would not let him see her fear. She'd spent too long cowering before Eric. She would not cower before Luca. "I will not be controlled," she hissed, her face inches from his. "Not by Eric, and not by you. If you want to keep me here, you are going to have to tie me to the chair." Luca stared down at her. His chest was heaving, rising and falling in time with hers. They were so close she could feel the heat radiating off him, smell the coffee and mint on his breath. His eyes blazed. But it was not just with frustration. There was something else there, a flash of dark, reluctant admiration. He looked at her like she was the only burning thing in a world of ash. For a second, the tension shifted. The anger curdled into something thick and heavy. Luca's gaze dropped to her mouth, and Ava felt a phantom pull, a magnetic urge to close the final inch between them, just to stop the fighting. Then, Luca looked away. He pushed himself off the wall, stepping back and running a hand through his hair. "You think this is about control?" he asked, his voice rough. "You think I am keeping you here because I need a liaison?" "I think you are keeping me here because you are selfish," Ava shot back. "I am keeping you here because if you leave, you are dead," Luca said. The words hung in the air, stark and brutal. Ava blinked. "What?" Luca walked back to his desk and picked up a file folder. He tossed it toward her. It slid across the polished wood and stopped at the edge. "Open it," he commanded. Ava hesitated, then walked over and flipped the folder open. Inside were photos, grainy surveillance photos, not of her, of Noah, her younger brother. Noah, photos of him entering a betting parlor in the bad part of town. Photos of him shaking hands with men Ava recognized from the news as associates of the Serrano family, Luca's rivals. And then, a copy of a ledger with Noah's name highlighted in red. "Noah owes $40,000 to the Serrano family," Luca said quietly. "He has been gambling, Ava, and he is not good at it." Ava felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the edge of the desk to keep her knees from buckling. Noah, her sweet, reckless baby brother who swore he was finishing his degree online. "$40,000, she whispered. "He borrowed it 3 months ago," Luca explained, watching her carefully. "He thought he could double it and pay for his tuition. He lost it all. The interest has been compounding. Why do you have this?" Ava asked, looking up at him, betrayal warring with shock. "Because I bought the debt," Luca said. 2 weeks ago, before the acquisition. My people found out your brother was in trouble with Serrano. I knew Serrano would use him to get to me, or to hurt you, once he realized you were close to me. So I bought the debt. I paid it off." Ava stared at him. "You paid it?" "Yes. And you did not tell me." "I did not want you to worry," Luca said. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep him safe without you knowing how deep in the hole he was." "You lied to me," Ava said, her voice shaking. "You kept this secret. You held it over my head without me even knowing." "I protected you," Luca roared, his control snapping again. "I kept your brother from having his legs broken in an alleyway." Ava felt sick. She felt a profound sense of betrayal, by Noah for his stupidity, and by Luca for his manipulation. "So what now?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I work for you until the debt is paid. Is that it? I am an indentured servant?" "No," Luca said, softening. His eyes searched hers, desperate for her to understand. "The money is gone. Ava, I do not care about the money. But Serrano knows who Noah is. He knows Noah is your brother, and he knows you are important to me. If you walk out that door, if you leave my protection, Serrano will pick up Noah within the hour. He will use him to drag you back, and he will use you to get to me." He walked around the desk again, stopping in front of her. He did not touch her, but his posture was pleading. "I am not offering you a job anymore. Ava, I'm offering you a fortress. Stay close to me. Let me put a detail on Noah. Let me keep you both safe until I end this war with Serrano." It sounded like a lifeline. It sounded like the only way to keep her brother alive. But as she looked into Luca's dark, imploring eyes, it also felt like a chain. "I hate you for this," Ava whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I know," Luca said softly. "I can live with your hate, Ava. I cannot live with your death." Ava did not quit. She could not. She spent the night in her own apartment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sirens of the city wail outside. Sleep was impossible. Her mind was a hamster wheel of anxiety. She thought about Noah, who she had called and screamed at for an hour until he dissolved into tears and apologies. She thought about Eric, whose possessive texts had stopped, replaced by a terrifying silence. And she thought about Luca. She replayed the way his body had covered hers in the SUV, the weight of him, the solid, unmovable reality of his protection. Eric had wanted to control her to make himself feel big. Luca was controlling her to keep her breathing. Was there a difference? Or was she just rationalizing her way into another cage because this jailer happened to have eyes that made her knees weak? The next day passed in a blur of tension. She worked from the office, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Luca gave her space, staying behind his closed door, but she could feel his presence like a gravitational pull. She left work at 6. Luca's driver took her home. She walked up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, her keys clutched in her hand like a weapon. When she reached her door, she stopped. It was unlocked. The wood around the frame was splintered. Ava's heart stopped. She pushed the door open slowly. Her apartment was a wreck. It had been torn apart with a meticulous, violent fury. The sofa cushions were slashed. Her books were pulled from the shelves and torn in half. Her clothes were scattered across the floor, covered in black spray paint. On the wall above her television, painted in jagged red letters, was a message. "Tell him to back off or you bleed next." A scream caught in Ava's throat, turning into a strangled sob. She stumbled back, dropping her keys. She scrambled for her phone, her fingers shaking so hard she dropped it twice before dialing. "Luca," she gasped when he answered on the first ring. "Ava, what is it? What is wrong?" His voice was instant, sharp alert. "My apartment," she sobbed. They broke in. "There is a message." "I am coming," Luca said. The line went dead. He was there in 12 minutes. Ava was sitting on the stairs in the hallway, hugging her knees, unable to look at the ruin of her sanctuary. She heard the heavy tread of boots running up the stairs. Luca appeared on the landing. He was not alone. 4 of his men were behind him, weapons drawn but held low. Luca took one look at her, curled up, shaking, pale as a ghost, and the fury that crossed his face was terrifying to behold. It was not the cold, calculated anger of a businessman. It was the raw, unguarded rage of a man whose heart had been threatened. He dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands hovering over her shoulders before gripping them firmly. "Did they touch you?" he demanded, scanning her face. "Were you here when it happened?" "No," Ava whispered. I just walked in." Luca pulled her into his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, crushing her against the solid wall of his body. Ava buried her face in his neck. The scent of him, sandalwood and safety, overwhelming the smell of spray paint and old dust. "I have got you," he murmured into her hair. "I have got you. You are never stepping foot in this place again." The safe house was in a part of the city Ava had never visited, a quiet, tree-lined district of brownstones that whispered of old money and privacy. The interior was elegant but sterile. It looked like a page out of an architectural magazine. Cream sofas, marble countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private garden. It was beautiful, and it felt completely devoid of life. Luca brought her there personally. He had sent his men to guard the perimeter, but inside, it was just the 2 of them. Ava sat at the kitchen island, watching as Luca moved around the kitchen. He had shed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt to his elbows, revealing the bandages on his arm and the corded muscle of his forearms. He was making tea. There was something jarringly domestic about the sight. The ruthless mafia boss who had threatened to dismantle her ex-boyfriend's life was now waiting for the kettle to boil, reaching into a cabinet to pull out mugs. "Here," he said, sliding a steaming mug toward her. "Earl Grey. With honey, that is how you drink it, right?" Ava looked at the mug, then up at him. "How do you know that?" "I notice things," Luca said simply. He leaned his hip against the counter, watching her. Ava wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. "Thank you." She took a sip. It was perfect. The warmth spread through her chest, untying some of the knots of fear. "I am sorry about your apartment," Luca said quietly. "I will have my people salvage what they can." "I will replace the rest. It is not about the stuff," Ava said, staring into the tea. "It is the violation, knowing they were there, knowing they touched my things." "I know," Luca said. His voice was heavy with a guilt he was not trying to hide. "This is my fault. I brought this to your door." Ava looked at him. He looked defeated. His shoulders slumped slightly. It was the first time she had seen him look anything less than invincible. "You did," she agreed softly. "But you also came. When I called, you came. I will always come," Luca said. His eyes locked on hers, intense and unwavering. 2 nights later, the silence of the safe house felt less like a cage and more like a cocoon. It had been a tense day. Luca had been on calls for hours, his voice low and angry as he dealt with the fallout of the vandalism and the escalating threats from Serrano. Ava had spent the day working remotely, trying to keep her mind off the fact that there were armed men standing in the garden. Now, evening had fallen. The lights in the living room were dimmed, the city lights twinkled through the massive glass windows, a distant galaxy that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Ava sat on the beige plush sofa, her legs tucked under her. Luca sat next to her, not on the other end, but close. Close enough that she could feel the heat of him. They were not talking. They were just existing in the same space, watching the lights. Slowly, tentatively, Luca's hand moved across the cushion between them. His fingers brushed against hers. Ava did not pull away. He threaded his fingers through hers, his palm warm and rough against her skin. He squeezed gently. Ava squeezed back. Their shoulders brushed, their thighs touched along the length of the couch. The contact hummed with an electric awareness that drowned out the noise of the city outdust. Ava let out a shaky breath. "I am scared. Luca, I know," he murmured, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles. "I'm not just scared of the guns," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I am scared of losing myself. I spent so long trying to rebuild myself after Eric. I finally felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet. And now I am here, hidden away, depending on you for everything. I am terrified that if I let myself need you, I will vanish." Luca turned his head. He looked at her with a fierce, heartbreaking tenderness. "You could never vanish. Ava," he said, "you shine too bright, even in the dark." He reached up with his free hand and cupped her face. His thumb brushed away a tear she had not realized had fallen. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "I do not want to own you," he whispered. "I just want to stand between you and the things that want to break you." Ava turned her face into his palm. The touch was grounding. She shifted, turning her body toward him. Luca opened his eyes. They were dark, dilated, filled with a question. Ava answered it by leaning in. Their lips met. It was not like the kiss at the club, born of panic and adrenaline, and it was not like the almost kiss at the gala, fraught with danger. This was slow. It was searching. Luca's lips moved over hers with a careful, reverent intensity. He tasted of tea and longing. Ava sighed into his mouth, her hands sliding up his chest to wrap around his neck, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. The kiss deepened, the heat flared, sudden and consuming. Ava pressed her body fully against his, needing to feel the solidity of him. She felt his control waver, felt the way his muscles tensed as he held himself back. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, tilting her head to deepen the angle. A moan escaped her throat, a sound of surrender. Luca pulled back. He broke the kiss, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers again, his chest heaved against hers. "Luca?" she whispered, dazed. "I can't," he rasped. He pulled back further, looking into her eyes. His pupils were blown wide, his mouth swollen from her kiss. He looked like a man in pain. "I cannot take this," he said, his voice rough. "Not tonight. Not when you are scared and vulnerable and stuck in my house." "But I want," Ava started. "I know," Luca interrupted gently, "and I want it more. than I have ever wanted anything. But I am not Eric. I will not take advantage of your fear." He smoothed a strand of hair back from her face, his touch lingering. "I promise you, Ava, I will not take more than you are fully ready to give, even if it kills me to stop." He kissed her forehead, a soft, chaste pressure that felt more intimate than anything that had come before. Then he stood up, his movements stiff, and walked to the window, putting the cold glass between himself and the temptation of her warmth. Ava watched him, her heart aching in her chest. She realized then that she was not losing herself. For the first time in her life, she was being found. The weeks that followed in the safe house were a study in slow, grinding erosion. What had begun as a terrifying necessity had morphed into a claustrophobic normalcy, but the air inside the elegant brownstone was thick with unspoken tension. Outside the reinforced windows, the autumn leaves were turning a violent shade of red, mirroring the escalating situation on the streets. Luca DeLuca was a man under siege. Ava saw it in the tightness of his jaw when he poured his morning coffee, in the way his phone never stopped vibrating against the marble countertop, and in the dark circles that had taken permanent residence under his eyes. The city was squeezing him. The police scrutiny had intensified, with patrol cars sitting conspicuously on the corners of every block where Luca owned property. But the law was a manageable headache. The real threat was Marco Serrano. Serrano was getting bolder. He was hitting Luca's supply chains, hijacking trucks and burning warehouses, the rumors whispering through the underworld and inevitably reaching Ava's ears through overheard conversations, suggested that Serrano knew things he should not know. He knew routes. He knew schedules. There was a leak, a traitor in the inner circle. Ava felt the strain radiating off Luca like heat from a furnace. He was shorter with his men, his orders clipped and harsh. With her, he was gentle, but distractedly so, as if he were constantly listening for the sound of a breaking window. To make matters worse, Noah was unraveling. Ava spoke to her brother daily on the secure line Luca had provided, and every conversation left her stomach in knots. Noah was erratic, oscillating between tearful gratitude that his debt was paid and defensive anger when Ava pressed him about his future. "You need to get a job, Noah," Ava insisted during a Tuesday afternoon call, pacing the length of the safe house living room. "A real job. Northline has an opening in the mailroom. It is entry level, but it is safe. I am not working in a mailroom." "Ava," Noah snapped, his voice slurring slightly, "I am better than that. Besides, your boyfriend has plenty of money. Why does it matter?" "He's not my boyfriend," Ava said, though the denial felt flimsy on her tongue. "And his money is not yours. You need to grow up." "Noah." Luca stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching her. When she hung up, frustrated and rubbing her temples, his expression was unreadable. "He's using again?" Luca asked quietly. "Not a judgment, just a fact." "I think so," Ava admitted. "Sinking onto the sofa? Or drinking? I do not know. I want to help him. Luca, but he makes it so hard." Luca did not answer immediately. He walked over and poured her a glass of water, placing it on the coaster with precise, controlled movements. "I have eyes on him. Ava. He's safe from Serrano for now, but he is walking a dangerous line." Ava looked up at him, searching his face. There was a hardness there, a cold pragmatism that chilled her. She knew he was protecting Noah because of her, not because he cared about her brother. In Luca's world, liabilities were usually removed, not coddled. That evening, dinner was a quiet, heavy affair. The housekeeper had left a lasagna, but neither of them had much of an appetite. The only sound in the dining room was the clink of silverware against china and the rain drumming against the window panes. Ava watched Luca push the food around his plate. He had been on the phone with Giovanni for an hour before dinner, and the news had clearly been bad. "Is it ever going to stop?" Ava asked suddenly. Luca looked up, blinking as if pulling himself back from a great distance. "What?" "The violence," Ava said, gesturing vaguely to the window and the world beyond it. "The guards in the garden, the armored cars, the looking over your shoulder. Does it ever end? Luca, do you have an exit strategy?" Luca set his fork down. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the dark red liquid. This is the life, Ava. It is not a job you retire from, but you are legitimate now. Ava pressed, leaning forward. You own hotels. You own Northline. You have enough money to walk away and never look back. Why don't you? Because power is not a coat you take off, Luca said, his voice dropping. If I step down, Serrano moves in. If Serrano moves in, he tears apart everything I built. He hurts the people I protect. So you stay in the mud forever? Ava challenged, her frustration spiking. We just live in safe houses until we die? I am trying to clean it up, Luca said, a defensive edge sharpening his tone. I am moving assets to legal sectors. But these things take time. How much time? Ava demanded. 5 years? 10. I cannot live like this. Luca, I cannot live wondering if the man I care about is going to come home in a body bag or handcuffs every night. Luca's eyes flashed. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You knew who I was when you kissed me, he said, his voice rising. I didn't. Ava stood too, matching his volume. I kissed a stranger in a suit. I didn't know I was kissing the godfather of the city. I am not the godfather, Luca snapped. I am a businessman who survives in a city of sharks, and I do not know how to be anything else. Ava, you want me to be some account manager who clocks out at 5? I cannot do that. I am not wired that way. Ava stared at him, her chest heaving. The admission hung in the air, stark and disappointing. It was not that he couldn't leave, it was that he didn't want to. He was addicted to the power just as much as Noah was addicted to his vices. That is the saddest thing I have ever heard, Ava whispered. The look on Luca's face shifted from anger to pain, as if she had slapped him. He turned and walked out of the dining room, heading for the living area. Ava followed him. She was not done. Don't walk away from me, she shouted, catching up to him near the fireplace. Luca spun around. We are done talking. Ava, there is no solution here. I am who I am. Ava shoved him. It was a burst of pure, unadulterated frustration. She pushed his shoulder with both hands, hard. He barely moved, rock solid. But the physical contact snapped something in the air between them. You are a coward, she said, her voice shaking. You are brave enough to face bullets, but you are too scared to try a normal life. Luca's control shattered. He reached out and caught her wrists before she could shove him again. His grip was firm, holding her hands suspended between their chests. He pulled her a step closer, forcing her to look up at him. I am terrified, he hissed, his face inches from hers. I am terrified that if I try to be normal, I will fail. And if I fail, I lose you. You are losing me anyway, Ava cried. The space between them vanished. It wasn't a conscious decision, it was a collision. Luca released her wrists and his hands flew to her face, his fingers threading into her hair. Ava let out a small, broken sound as his mouth crashed down on hers. This was not gentle. It was fierce. It was desperate. It was an argument continuing in a different language. Ava's hands fisted in the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, anchoring him to her. She opened to him, tasting the wine and the fury on his tongue. His teeth grazed her lower lip, a sharp, possessive bite that sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. Luca groaned low in his throat, a sound of surrender. He walked her backward, his body pressing hers until her back hit the cool plaster of the wall. He did not pin her there to dominate her. He caged her there because he needed to be everywhere she was. He pressed his hips against hers, the hard ridge of his desire undeniable, his thigh slotting between her legs. Ava gasped against his mouth, her head falling back against the wall. Luca buried his face in the curve of her neck, his breath hot and ragged against her skin. He kissed the sensitive spot below her ear, his hands sliding down her sides to grip her waist, then lower to the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. I don't know how to give you a clean life, he murmured against her skin, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know how to be the man you deserve, but I can give you this. I can give you my loyalty. I can give you my protection. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his dark eyes blazing with a vulnerability that stole her breath. I can give you my heart. Ava. It is black and it is scarred, but it is yours, if you want it." Ava stared at him, her lips swollen, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. She was standing on the edge of a cliff. Every logical neuron in her brain was screaming that this man would ruin her, that loving him was a death sentence. But as his thumb brushed over her cheekbone, shaking slightly, she knew it was too late. She was already falling. She reached up, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "Luca," she whispered. She was about to tell him she wanted it, black heart and all. The phone on the coffee table rang. The sound was shrill, violent, shattering the bubble of intimacy like a hammer through glass. Luca froze. He closed his eyes for a second, a look of pure agony crossing his face, before he rested his forehead against hers. "Don't answer it," Ava whispered. "I have to," Luca rasped. He pulled away from her, the loss of his warmth leaving her shivering against the wall. "It is the emergency line." He walked over to the table and picked up the phone. Ava watched him, hugging her arms around herself, trying to hold on to the feeling of his mouth on hers. "Yeah," Luca said into the phone. His voice had instantly shifted back to the cold, hard tone of the boss. He listened for a moment. Then, his spine stiffened. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Are you sure?" Luca asked. His eyes flicked to Ava, and then quickly away. Ava felt a cold pit open in her stomach. That look. It was guilt. "Okay," Luca said. "Keep eyes on him. Do not engage yet. I need to think." He hung up the phone. He stood there for a moment, his back to her, looking out the window at the dark garden. "What is it?" Ava asked, her voice trembling. Luca turned around. His face was a mask of stone. "It is the leak," he said. "We found out who has been feeding information to Marco Serrano." "Who?" Ava asked. "One of my lieutenants saw Noah meeting with one of Serrano's captains an hour ago." Luca said. The room spun. "No," Ava said, shaking her head. "No, Noah wouldn't. He is stupid." "Luca, but he is not a traitor. He knows what Serrano did to us. He was handing over an envelope." "Ava," Luca said ruthlessly, and 10 minutes later, one of my shipments was hit. "It is a coincidence," Ava insisted, stepping toward him. "You cannot believe he would do that." "I have to look at the facts," Luca shouted, the stress finally breaking through. "I need to go to the office," he said abruptly, grabbing his jacket. "I need to see the surveillance footage myself." He stormed out of the room, leaving Ava standing there, stunned and sick. 20 minutes passed. Ava paced the living room, her mind racing. Noah. It couldn't be Noah. He was weak, yes, but he loved her. He wouldn't sell her out to the people trying to kill her boyfriend. She needed to understand. She needed to know what Luca was thinking. She walked into the small home office Luca had been using during their stay at the safe house. The desk was covered in papers, maps of the city, financial ledgers, personnel files. She started sifting through them, looking for anything related to Noah. She moved a stack of invoices and saw a manila folder with a red tab. It was labeled Contingency Protocols, Assets, Liabilities. Ava opened it. Her eyes scanned the pages, reading the cold, clinical language of organized crime, and then she saw it. Subject: Noah Martin. Status: liability. Risk level: high. Protocol if compromised. Complete severance. If confirmed as a leak source. Subject is to be handed over to opposing faction as a peace offering or eliminated to close the vulnerability. Ava stopped breathing. Handed over. Eliminated. The date on the file was from 3 days ago. The front door opened. Luca was back. He had forgotten his keys on the entry table. He walked down the hall and stopped when he saw Ava standing in the office, the file open in her hands. Luca went still. Ava looked up. Her eyes were filled with tears, but behind the tears was a cold, hard fury. "You were going to kill him," she whispered. Luca stepped into the room, holding up a hand. "Ava, listen to me." "It says right here," she said, her voice shaking as she held up the paper. "Eliminated. You wrote a plan to kill my brother." "It is a contingency plan," Luca said desperately. "I write them for everyone. It is how I think. I have to map out every worst-case scenario." "He is my brother," Ava screamed, throwing the file at him. Papers fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. You sat at dinner with me. You kissed me. You told me you wanted to give me your heart, and all the while you had a piece of paper on your desk outlining how you were going to murder my family. I didn't do it, Luca shouted back. I had the order ready. Ava. When I found out he was gambling again, when I thought he might turn, I wrote it down. But I didn't sign it. I couldn't do it. Because of you. Because of me? Ava laughed, a harsh, hysterical sound. So if I wasn't here, Noah would be dead? You are playing God. Luca, you decide who lives and who dies based on a ledger. I am trying to keep us alive. Luca pleaded, reaching for her. Don't touch me, Ava recoiled. You are a monster. I thought you were different. I thought you were a protector. But you are just a killer in a nice suit. Ava, please, Luca said, his voice cracking. Nothing happened. Noah is safe. I just told the guys to watch him, not hurt him. I can't be here, Ava said. She felt suffocated. The air in the room felt poisonous. I can't look at you. She pushed past him, running into the hallway. She grabbed her purse and her coat. Where are you going? Luca demanded, following her. You can't leave. Serrano is out there. I would rather take my chances with Serrano than stay in a house with a man who drafts murder plots for my brother. Ava spat. I will take you, Luca said, grabbing his keys. No, Ava shouted. I don't want you near me. I am going to the corporate apartment, the one near the agency. It is secure, right? Yes, but then I am going there. Alone. I need to think. I need to figure out if I can ever look at you again without seeing that file. She opened the door. The rain had stopped, but the wind was howling. Ava. Wait, Luca called out, stepping onto the porch. Ava didn't stop. She ran down the steps to where the standby car was waiting. The driver, confused, looked at Luca. Luca, standing in the doorway, looked defeated. He gave a curt nod to the driver, signaling him to take her. He watched the taillights disappear around the corner, a feeling of dread settling in his gut that had nothing to do with business. The corporate apartment was a sterile one-bedroom unit, 3 blocks from Northline Media. Ava had the driver drop her off at the corner, needing the cold air to clear her head. She walked the last half block, her heels clicking on the wet pavement. Her mind was a mess. Part of her knew Luca was right, that in his world. Noah was a liability, but the other part, the sister, couldn't forgive the cold-blooded calculation of it. She reached the lobby of the building. It was empty. The doorman was nowhere to be seen. She pressed the button for the elevator. Ava. The voice came from the shadows near the mailboxes. It was familiar, but it sounded wrong, warped. Ava turned. Eric stepped out. He looked terrible. Gaunt, unshaven, his eyes wild and glassy. He was wearing a leather jacket that looked too big for him. Eric? Ava frowned, taking a step back. What are you doing here? How did you know I was here? I have new friends. Ava, Eric said, smiling, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They are very good at finding people, especially people who matter to Luca DeLuca. Ava reached for her phone. Get away from me. Eric. Eric laughed. He pointed a finger at her. You think you are better than me because you are with him? He is a criminal. Ava. He is scum. And you are stalking me, Ava said, her thumb hovering over Luca's contact. I am not stalking you, Eric said. I am bait. Before Ava could process the words, the service door behind her burst open. 2 men wearing ski masks rushed out. Ava opened her mouth to scream, but a gloved hand clamped over her face. She dropped her phone. It skittered across the marble floor. She fought. She kicked and scratched, landing a blow on one man's shin, but they were too strong. They dragged her toward the service exit. Eric watched, his face twisted in a look of triumphant spite. Tell your boyfriend hello for me, he sneered. They shoved her into the back of a waiting van. The door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. The last thing she thought of as the engine roared to life was Luca's face in the doorway, and the terrible realization that he had been right. If she left him, she was gone. Luca was pouring a whiskey he didn't want when his phone buzzed. He ignored it. He was staring at the spot on the wall where Ava had been pinned against him an hour ago. The house felt massive and empty. He felt like he had cut off his own limb. The phone buzzed again and again. A text message. He picked it up, annoyed. It was from an unknown number. There was no text, just a video file. Luca's blood ran cold. He pressed play. The video was shaky, shot in a dimly lit industrial space. In the center of the frame, tied to a wooden chair with thick zip ties, was Ava. Her hair was messy, her lip was bleeding, and her eyes were wide with terror, but her chin was lifted in that defiant way he loved. Behind her stood Eric, holding a gun to her head. "Hello." "Luca," Eric said into the camera, grinning like a maniac. "You embarrassed me. You took what was mine. Now, I am taking what is yours." Eric leaned down and sniffed Ava's hair. Ava flinched away, spitting at him. "Don't touch me!" Eric backhanded her. Ava's head snapped to the side. Luca shattered the whiskey glass in his hand. Shards of crystal sliced into his palm, but he didn't feel it. "Come and get her, big man," Eric said to the camera. "The old shipyard, warehouse 4. Come alone, or she dies slow." The video ended. Luca stared at the black screen. The rage that filled him was not hot. It was absolute zero. It was the cold, quiet void of space. He set the phone down on the counter, right next to his bleeding hand. "Giovanni!" he roared. His second-in-command came running from the security room. "Boss, get the car," Luca said. His voice was devoid of all human emotion. Giovanni looked at Luca's hand, dripping blood onto the floor, and then at his face. He saw the look in Luca's eyes, the look of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to destroy. "Call the boys?" Giovanni asked. "All of them," Luca said. "We are going to war." He walked to the hidden panel in the wall of the study and punched in the code. The panel slid open, revealing an arsenal of weapons. Luca reached for a matte black pistol and a tactical vest. He checked the chamber of the gun with a mechanical snap. He had promised Ava he wouldn't play God. He had lied. Tonight. He was going to bring the apocalypse down on anyone who had touched her. The air inside the abandoned warehouse tasted of rust, stale seawater, and old oil. Ava sat tied to a wooden chair in the center of the vast, hollow space, the zip ties digging cruelly into her wrists. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but she forced her face to remain a mask of cold stone. She would not give Eric the satisfaction of her tears. Not again. Eric paced in front of her, the gun in his hand trembling slightly. He looked manic, his eyes darting to the metal doors every few seconds. "He is not coming," Eric spat, turning to glare at her. "You think he cares about you? You are a liability. Ava. Men like Luca DeLuca do not trade their empires for girls they met in nightclubs. He will come," Ava said, her voice steady despite the dry cotton in her mouth. "And when he does, you are going to wish you had just stayed away." Eric laughed, a high, jagged sound that bounced off the corrugated metal walls. "You still do not get it. You are just a pawn, a piece on the board. He used you to get to your brother. He used you to look legitimate. And now, he's going to let you die to save his own skin." Ava looked at him, really looked at him, and realized with a jolt of clarity that she was not looking at a monster. She was looking at a small, frightened man trying to wear a costume that was too big for him. "You look so small, Eric," Ava said quietly. Eric stopped pacing. "What? You are trying so hard to be scary," Ava continued, her chin lifting, "but you are just pathetic. Luca does not need to wave a gun around to command a room. He walks in, and the world shifts. You could hold an arsenal, and you would still just be the boy who could not handle a breakup." "Shut up," Eric screamed, raising the gun. Ava flinched, but she did not look away. Behind her back, her fingers were working frantically. The zip ties were tight, but the wood of the old chair was splintered. She'd been rubbing the plastic binding against a jagged nail protruding from the seat frame for the last 20 minutes. It was slow, agonizing work that scraped her skin raw, but she could feel the plastic beginning to thin. Outside the heavy metal doors, the night was silent, but it was the silence of a held breath. Luca DeLuca stood in the shadows of a shipping container, flanked by Giovanni and 4 of his best men. He checked the magazine of his pistol, his movements mechanical, but his mind was a storm. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, slow and heavy. He closed his eyes for 1 second. He forced himself to breathe. He summoned the memory of Ava, the feel of her lips on his, the way she had looked at him in the safe house, the trembling vulnerability in her voice when she said she did not want to be controlled. If he went in there as the monster she feared, he might save her body, but he would lose her soul. He had to be precise. He had to be controlled. "We go in hard," Luca whispered to Giovanni, "but we check our targets. Ava is in the middle. If anyone so much as scratches her, you end them." Giovanni nodded grimly. "And Eric? Eric is mine," Luca said. He signaled the breach. The explosion of noise was instantaneous. The heavy warehouse doors were rammed open by the armored SUV, metal screeching against metal. Smoke grenades rolled across the concrete floor, hissing and spewing thick gray fog. Gunfire erupted from the catwalks where Marco Serrano's men were stationed. Luca moved. He did not run. He advanced. He moved from cover to cover, firing with deadly accuracy. He saw a muzzle flash to his left and returned fire, watching a man fall. A bullet sparked off the concrete inches from his boot. Another tugged at the fabric of his jacket, searing a line of fire across his ribs. He grunted, stumbling slightly as the graze burned, but he did not stop. The pain was good. The pain focused him. Every step was for Ava. Inside the circle of crates, Eric panicked. The sound of the assault was deafening. He grabbed the back of Ava's chair, dragging her backward, using her body as a shield against the chaos. "He is here!" Eric screamed, his voice cracking. Ava felt the chair tip as Eric yanked it. The movement shifted her weight. She felt the weakened zip tie snap against the nail. Her hands were free. She kept them behind her back, feigning captivity. Her eyes darted around the floor. In the debris near Eric's feet, she saw it, a rusted, jagged piece of metal, likely a remnant of some old machinery. Eric was distracted, firing wildly into the smoke. Ava waited. She needed 1 second, just one. Luca burst through the wall of smoke. He looked like a demon rising from hell. His suit was covered in dust. Blood stained his white shirt at the side, and his eyes were black voids of fury. He saw them. "Luca!" Ava screamed. Eric spun around, realizing his shield was compromised. In that split second of confusion, Ava moved. She did not cower. She kicked out with both legs, driving her heels into Eric's shins. As he stumbled, howling in pain, she threw her weight to the side, tipping the chair over. She crashed to the concrete floor, the impact knocking the wind out of her, but she scrambled. She grabbed the jagged metal shard. She sawed at the ropes binding her ankles, the adrenaline making her movements a blur. Eric recovered fast. He lunged for her, grabbing a handful of her hair and hauling her up. He jammed the barrel of his gun against her temple. "Stop!" Eric shrieked at Luca. "Stop or I paint the floor with her!" Luca froze. He was 10 feet away. His gun was raised, aimed directly at Eric's head, but the angle was bad. Eric was cowering behind Ava, shaking so badly that the gun against her head was vibrating. "Drop it," Eric panted. "Drop the gun. DeLuca." Luca looked at Ava. Her hair was tangled, her lip was bleeding, and there was a bruise forming on her cheek, but her eyes were not defeated. They were blazing. Luca slowly lowered his weapon. He set it on the concrete floor and kicked it away. "Let her go." "Eric," Luca said. His voice was not a shout. It was a hoarse, steady rumble that cut through the ringing silence of the warehouse. "This is between you and me. Let her walk out and you can have me." Ava's breath hitched. "No," she whispered. Eric stared at Luca, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You would trade. The great Luca de Luca, trading his life for a girl?" "She is not just a girl," Luca said, taking a slow step forward, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. "She is the only thing in this room that matters." Eric's face twisted into a sneer of triumph. "You are weak. I knew it." "I knew you were weak." He began to monologue, the words spilling out in a rush of vindictive glee. "I am going to kill you, Luca, and then I am going to take over your territory. And she is going to watch. She's going to watch you bleed out, and she is going to know it was her fault." Ava felt Eric's grip on her loosen slightly as he gestured with his free hand, caught up in his fantasy of power. She did not wait for Luca to save her. She twisted her body violently, dropping her weight and driving her elbow back with every ounce of strength she possessed. It connected solidly with Eric's ribs. Eric wheezed, the air rushing out of him. The gun wavered. "Now!" Ava screamed, throwing herself to the ground. Luca launched himself. He covered the 10 feet in a blur of motion. He tackled Eric, slamming him into the concrete with a bone-jarring thud. The gun skittered away into the darkness. It was not a fight, it was an execution. Luca was on top of him instantly. He did not use technique. He used brute, primal force. He punched Eric in the face, the sound of fist meeting flesh sickeningly loud. "You touched her!" Luca snarled, landing another blow. "You touched her!" Eric tried to cover his face, sobbing, but Luca tore his hands away. Each punch was powered by weeks of fear, by the image of the bullet holes in the SUV, by the terror in Ava's eyes on the video. "Luca!" Ava scrambled to her knees. Luca did not stop. His knuckles were split. Eric was no longer fighting back. He was just a bloody mess on the floor. Luca drew back his fist for a final, lethal blow that would crush Eric's windpipe. "Luca, no!" Ava crawled forward and grabbed his shoulder. "Luca, look at me!" Luca froze. His arm was cocked back, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and unseeing. He was on the precipice, ready to cross a line he could never uncross. Ava reached up and touched his face, her hand smeared with dust and his blood. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Don't do this. He's not worth it. You are not this man. Luca." Luca blinked. The red haze in his vision slowly cleared. He looked down at Eric, who was unconscious and broken, and then he looked up at Ava. He saw the fear in her eyes, not of Eric, but of him. He let out a ragged breath and lowered his fist. He slowly stood up, stepping away from Eric's body. He staggered slightly, the adrenaline crash hitting him along with the pain in his side. Serrano's men had fled or been neutralized by Giovanni's team. The warehouse was quiet, save for the distant rising wail of sirens. The police. Giovanni said, stepping out of the shadows, "We need to go." "Boss, no," Luca said, leaning heavily against a wooden crate. "Leave Eric. Let them find him, and tell them where to find Marco's stash." Giovanni's eyes widened. "You tipped them off? That exposes half our distribution network. I burned it," Luca said, looking at Ava. "I burned it all down. It ends tonight." Giovanni nodded slowly, understanding the magnitude of the sacrifice. He signaled the men to clear out. Luca and Ava were alone in the circle of light. Ava rushed to him. She checked the blood on his side, her hands shaking. "You are hurt. It is a scratch," Luca rasped. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away a smudge of dirt from her cheek. He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Ava wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest. You came for me." "I told you," Luca said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will always come." He pulled back to look at her. "Loving you has made me weak, Ava," he admitted, a rough laugh escaping him. "I used to be untouchable. Now, I am terrified every second of the day." Ava shook her head. "No, it made you strong enough to stop. It made you strong enough to let the gun go." Luca looked at his hands, bruised and bloody. "I cannot promise to be a good man overnight. Ava, I have too much blood on me, but I can promise to try. I can promise to carve out a quieter life, a cleaner life, if you will stay." Ava smiled through her tears. She stood on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his bruised jaw. "I am not going anywhere," she promised. 6 months later, the skyline of the city looked different in the winter sunlight. It looked cleaner, sharper. Ava Martin sat in the corner office of the newly rebranded Northline DeLuca Strategic Group. The name had been her idea. Transparency. She had argued. Hide nothing. She was the senior strategist now. And she had earned every inch of the glass office. She had her own apartment, a nice one, paid for with her own salary. And she drove a car she had bought herself. The door to her office opened. Ava looked up from her presentation deck to see Luca walking in. He looked different. The tension that used to coil in his shoulders was gone. He was still intimidating. He would always be a man who commanded a room, but the darkness in his eyes had lifted. He wore a navy suit, his tie loosened, looking every bit the legitimate hotelier and real estate mogul he had become. He had kept his word. It had been messy, expensive, and dangerous. But he had divested from the violent parts of his empire. He had sold the territories, paid off the debts, and cut ties with the families. His circle was smaller now, just Giovanni and a few loyalists, but it was safe. "Ready for the pitch?" Luca asked, leaning against the doorframe. Ava stood up, smoothing her blazer. "I was born ready. You are sitting in the back, right? No intimidation tactics? I am just a client," Luca said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. A very satisfied client. He watched her as she gathered her files. There was a look of quiet awe on his face, a look that said he still could not quite believe she was real, that she had stayed through the storm. That evening, the snow was falling softly on the city. Eclipse had been remodeled. The dark, shadowy corners were gone, replaced by warm velvet, soft lighting, and an upscale jazz lounge atmosphere. It was no longer a front for money laundering. It was the hottest ticket in town for live music. Ava and Luca stood on the VIP balcony, looking down at the crowd. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Ava said, leaning against the railing. "It was a lifetime ago." Luca agreed. He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. The music hummed below, a saxophone playing a slow, mournful tune. Ava relaxed into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. "We made it," she whispered. Luca turned her around in his arms. He looked down at her, his expression serious. "I still do not know if I deserve you, Ava," he murmured, his hand coming up to tip her chin. "I have a lot to answer for." Ava smiled, her eyes shining in the soft light. "I do not need perfection, Luca," she said softly. "I never asked for a saint. I just need honesty. And I need a man who will stand with me, not over me. I can do that," Luca vowed. "I will spend the rest of my life doing that." He lowered his head. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the warehouse, nor the panicked kiss of their first meeting. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was heavy with the weight of shared battles and chosen trust. Ava's hand slid up his chest, her fingers curling into his shirt. She deepened the kiss, opening to him, welcoming him home. They broke apart slowly, breathless, foreheads resting together. They turned back to the railing, looking out over the club, their fingers intertwined. The storm was over. But even if another one came, Ava knew, with absolute certainty, that they would weather it together. Thank you so much for listening to the story She Kissed the Mafia Boss at the Nightclub, and the next day she discovered he would be her new boss. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Ava and Luca as much as I enjoyed telling it. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below telling me where you are listening from and what you thought of the ending. Did Luca redeem himself in your eyes? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of passion, danger, and redemption. Thank you for your support, and see you in the next story.